Mic check, what's going on? Welcome into another episode of the KZ Community Beat. It's a very special one. It's episode 50. I don't have sound effects, but maybe I'll get some petty cash this year. Anyways, my guest for episode 50 from the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council, the CEO, Chris Setti. Welcome in, brother.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, man. I check in on 25 News daily for, show prep, all that. And an article stuck out to me. It was an article with you in it talking about how we had expected a downfall for the economy in Peoria, but it actually was a lot better than we expected.
Yeah, I think nationally we were expecting, or maybe even, I should say, maybe even globally, we were expecting a recession, right, to happen.
That was a big,
right, that's what all the economists were bracing us for, was there was going to be a recession. High inflation. We did get high inflation, but it never really turned into the recession, at least in the way that recessions are traditionally defined, right? With a negative growth in gross domestic product, high unemployment rate. We didn't really ever see that. And so as we moved through the year, thought, maybe we have dodged this. So now there's some concern, right? In 2024, we might see it, but I don't know. So, going into 2023, all of us were kind of preparing for, what happens if there are mass layoffs or there's a downturn or people stop spending money? And it just turned out that wasn't the case. I think here in Peoria, our economy is both. So I always say we have three pillars of the economy in Peoria. We have agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare. Agriculture is agriculture, right? The crops still grow. I mean, they could be weather related, and there could be some market pressures on the cost of corn or the cost of soybeans or things like that. But for the most part, it's a relatively resilient industry for even downturns. Right?
It grows.
Right. It still grows, right? And there's such a need, especially for what we grow here in corn and soybean, which goes into fuel and other sorts of byproducts. Those markets tend to be pretty resilient as well. Healthcare, another, unfortunately, people still get sick and they still need healthcare. And we have such an amazing healthcare sector in Peoria. It's just amazing. It's actually our largest employer by industry, larger than manufacturing. And we have not only, every community our size has hospitals, right? What we have is a healthcare system. We have not only secondary care, but tertiary care, and a new word I just learned, quaternary care, which
I have no idea what that is.
I didn't either. I had to actually look it up. It's the fourth level. So the word primary, secondary, and tertiary, 1, 2, and 3. Mm-hmm. Then somebody said quaternary, and what that means is we have some services that are so specific and so specialized that you can only get them in very few places. Cancer treatment that OSF is doing with their new cancer center is one of those. There's only 7 or 8 of these machines around the country. So this is like that extra level of service. So that even if a community is struggling economically, the fact that people will have to come into this community from outlying areas to get medical services helps to bolster that part of the economy. And then our last part of the economy is manufacturing. And manufacturing is super strong in central Illinois and in the Peoria area. It tends to be a little bit more sensitive to what's happening outside of Peoria, right? We're not making things at Komatsu and Caterpillar and Liberty Steel that Peorians use. We use some of those things, but the world uses those products. I mean, Komatsu makes the world's largest mining truck, and not one of them is used even in the United States. They're used up in Canada and mostly in South America and Africa. These are for large mines, right? So it doesn't, things could be going great or poorly in Peoria, and that's not going to impact Komatsu. It's all about copper, the price of copper, and if somebody wants to be pulling copper out of the ground. Same with bulldozers that they make in East Peoria for Caterpillar. So the world economy has its impact on our local economy in that way, because if less people need bulldozers, then Caterpillar's going to make less bulldozers and employ less people to do that. Mm-hmm. But luckily though, that's the area that we think would be the most sensitive, right, to any sort of global or national downturn. but we didn't see that in the United States or really across the globe. So our our sectors here stayed relatively strong. Those are the sectors that employ people that then go out to eat at restaurants and shop. So everything kind of was okay. I wouldn't say, our economy didn't go gangbusters in 2023, but relative to projections, it did. And that is never to diminish the individual impact that economic conditions might have on a family or our pockets of poverty. So I'm pretty sensitive to when I say the economy is doing well. Doesn't mean it's doing well for everybody. We have we still have some significant issues, right, in Peoria and in the country, again, around, pockets of persistent poverty. And so I always hate when I say something like, the economy is doing just great, and somebody who's listening to this goes, "Oh, not for me. I lost my job or I can't find work."
No, that's
we
fair.
recognize that on an individual basis it might be different for folks.
But on an economical level for the town,
right,
or for our city, rather, it is performing at a decent level enough to keep jobs afloat.
Yep.
And keep food on the table.
And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs open for those who can take them. We manage a job board at our organization. Has about 115 companies on it. It's jobs.peoria.org. I might as well throw that out there.
Nice plug. I love it.
Yeah. There's over 1,100 jobs posted on that board right now.
1,100.
Now they are not necessarily all entry-level jobs, so you might have to have a certificate to be a CNA or a welder or a truck driver. But, people who have those sorts of certificates, that sort of credentials, we'll call them, there's lots of jobs available. Right now, and you would expect if we were in a bust cycle, right, we wouldn't have any jobs available. But still, the number one issue that employers tell me when we talk to them is they can't find enough people to do the work. Really?
Yeah. Now, what contributing factors have they assessed or come up with that contribute to that factor?
I think there's a lot of things. Again, this isn't a Peoria alone problem. This is a national problem that employers are talking about. I think that COVID really changed the way people even think about work, and their need. There are a lot of other ways to make money now that there weren't 10, 15 years ago in what we would call the gig economy. Yeah. So when you were had to stay home during COVID, maybe you lost your job at a restaurant or a place that had to close down. You found a way of staying afloat because you became an Uber driver or an Instacart deliverer or you DoorDashed or
fans only.
People learn how to make money, right, and get by. And maybe two-income households learned because their kids had to stay home from school, and so somebody had to not go to work to watch the kids while they were e-learning, and they figured out they could make it work without it. I think there's still some significant barriers to employment, especially for our more disadvantaged communities, transportation, childcare, just economic resiliency in general. If you don't have wealth, and wealth is just kind of defined as the money you have left over after you pay all your bills, right?
Yeah.
So
sometimes it's not really there either.
Right. So if you don't have the ability, maybe you've got a car, it gets you to work, but maybe it has a flat tire and you don't have money to get new tires, or the babysitter calls sick, right? And you don't have a way of accommodating those things. That just kind of wears people down. And,
bills paid, but you don't have enough to get groceries.
Right. So all of those things are also in play. I think we have some just generational differences, quite frankly, and I've said this publicly before. I'll say it again. I think our employers need to think differently about how they do employment, right? How so? Well, maybe the fact I remember talking. This was a couple of years ago. I talked to a local company here who was struggling for workers, and they couldn't understand why they couldn't get anybody to come to work for them. And I said, "Well, what are you paying?" And they said $13 an hour. This is when that was the minimum wage. I said, "Well, maybe you need to raise how much you're paying people because there are people that'll pay them more. So sometimes you just got to be more competitive. Sometimes you need to maybe understand where your employees are coming from. So if your attendance policy is overly strict or strict, what are your HR practices as a company? where are you looking for employees? Are you just putting ads in papers that nobody's reading, or are you, what's your onboarding process? There are all sorts of things. So I think both sides of this equation need to look differently at how potential employees have to understand, that the jobs are hard, and sometimes you got to work hard, and you have to show up on time, and you have to, be nice to your coworkers, and all those things that, maybe some of that decency and common sense have been eroded over the years by social media. And you just can't yell at your boss because you don't like them.
Yeah,
right.
That's another one.
But also employers have to understand that they're dealing with a new generation, and some new ways of thinking and different economic pressures, and that they have to adjust as well.
Have you seen that locally here, how businesses are starting to adapt to new climate and culture? I mean, we've changed drastically, like you said, since COVID. Before coming to town, I got told downtown was moving, jumping. It was a completely different element than what it is now.
I think it depends on the employer, right? So we have certainly seen the impact of COVID on going to work, going to the office. Now, you can't be a nurse remotely. Well, you can't be a bedside nurse remotely. Actually, there's lots of nursing that's virtual, but it's a different
podcast.
Topic, right? You can't work for Morton Industries from your home, right? If you're a welder, you're a welder at a place that does welding. Yeah. So, but we have seen from our offices, from the places like OSF, downtown, facility, that they're not requiring their workers come to work every day, to the office. It might be 3 days a week. Caterpillar, kind of the same thing. They may have some more flexible policies. Where prior to COVID, they're like, no, you're going to be in the office at 8 o'clock every day. You're going to leave at 5 o'clock every day. And so there's been that, just to accommodate their employees and what their employees found that they could do. On more of the you got to show up type jobs, I've seen some examples of companies who have just tried to do things different, creating incentives for people who stay longer. There's a company in Pekin, Excalibur Seasonings, in Pekin, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but they changed their shifts around. So instead of 4 8-hour shifts or 5 8-hour shifts where you work 40 hours a week, they went to 3 12-hour shifts. And so they had a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday shift, and a Thursday, Friday, Saturday shift.
How was that received?
And this was about a year and a half ago. I had this conversation. The employees loved it because they were, and I think the rule was if you worked 36 hours, you get paid like you worked 40. So if you made all 36, you get paid like 40.
So that 4 was covered by that.
Yeah, and so but now all of a sudden you've got a 4-day weekend every week. So that's a different way of thinking about your job because we're plugged in as Americans. Think the work week is Monday through Friday,
9 to 5,
right, or 8 to 5, or whatever it is. Sometimes you just got to think differently. Is there a way we can do this better as a company that might, then now if you've got childcare issues, you don't have 5 days worth of childcare issues.
Yeah.
You've got 3 days of childcare issues. If you have transportation
that frees up
issues,
some more funds.
You have to have 10 rides to and from work. You have to have 6 rides to and from work. So it doesn't work for every company. Some companies aren't going to be able to do that. But it's about thinking differently, both as the employer and as the employee.
Have you seen, you've been doing this for how long now? It says you had 10 years before coming here in
I've been a professional
Denver.
for 28 years
28
now.
years.
So in one way or the other, I've done economic development for 18.
So have you seen companies that tried to adopt that 4-day weekend and it's failed for them or it's succeeded on either side?
Well, again, as I remember when talking to Excalibur Seasonings, it was doing really great for them. They were that their employees really appreciated and they saw higher productivity. I'm sure that there are companies out there that have tried and failed at doing something different, and sometimes it just doesn't work. But I think that in the environment we're in, where there's I don't call it a labor shortage, but there's certainly some stress in the labor market. Everybody's got to be creative about doing something different.
Mm-hmm. So you've been doing this for years. What got you into this business, man?
Well, by accident. Can I just say that? Is it all right if I say I had no plan to ever be? I didn't even know that economic development was a thing.
I'll be honest. Not until I read the article, I was like, "Oh, look at this."
Well, I was in social services. I worked in homeless services originally out of college in Chicago, And then I worked in youth services. I ran some mentoring programs for at-risk youth and young adults.
Oh, really?
And I did that
cool.
in Chicago and then in Denver. And my wife, who's from Peoria, who I met in Chicago, we moved out to Denver when we got married. Then we moved back here, and I was still working at that same organization that did youth mentoring, and is a national nonprofit organization. And then that company kind of just went out of business. Basically, it's a long story, short, long story. But they were all of a sudden they were out of business, and I was out of a job.
Damn, yeah.
And a friend of mine, who's now the county administrator in Peoria County, had said to me, "Hey, the city of Peoria is looking for an economic development specialist." And I'm almost positive I said to him, "What's that?" But I applied for this job and was interviewed, and they hired me. And it was the kind of an entry level position in the city of Peoria's economic development department. I didn't know. I had no training in it. I happened to have my master's in public administration, which I had gotten when I was in Denver. And an MPA is kind of like an MBA for the public sector. We like to say it's an MBA for people with a conscience. You get your MBA.
MBA with a conscience.
I'm sure there's somebody out there who's been offended now by that. But it was
that was nice. Right. I like that. Yeah.
It was to make. I got that to make me a better nonprofit executive, not to go into public. Into public sector work
to help feed that nourishment.
Right.
That
well, I mean, that's what my career trajectory at that time was in nonprofit work, and I was like, well, I want to be an executive director someday, and so the management classes were more geared towards that. But I had this MPA after my name, and I think that helped me get on with the city because that's what a lot of city managers and planners and others
nice title
have those credentials after their name. So I got to work for the city for 12 years. And I had a bunch of different jobs. I had a bunch of different titles. They all kind of felt like the same job after a while. I always had my hand in economic development when I was at the city. Either I was directly in the department. I moved on to the city manager's office, and some of your listeners who have been here for a while might recognize I was the city's Six Sigma black belt, which was Six Sigma was a management tool that was invented actually by Toyota, or not invented by Toyota, kind of widely adopted by Toyota and Caterpillar, and everybody started adopting this management philosophy around data-based decision-making and how to wring efficiency out of, out of different processes, and how do you fix things. So that was I got trained to be a Six Sigma, and I worked projects at the city, like helping. Like I remember I ran a project in animal control, how to improve the rate at which people re-register their pets every year. It was important, but it also kind of, like, in hindsight, didn't feel that important. But that was my job, was to kind of go around. But I always kind of ended up doing some economic development stuff, and then was in the city manager's office and was asked to serve as the assistant city manager, and I was the ACM for 7 years maybe, towards the end of my career at the city. And then they also said, would you be the director of economic development as well? So I was the city's director of economic development probably for the last 4 years, I'd say. It all kind of blurs together now. And so I don't know if I got any good at economic development, but I made a career of it, and learned a lot kind of on the fly. Yeah. And so at the city, a lot of my jobs were very local. So I did a lot of the warehouse district. Some of the earliest stuff in the warehouse district were projects I got to work on. So Zion Coffee.
Which is real nice. I've been there a couple times.
That building, the Murray building where Rodell's is, the Persimmon Lofts, Sugar. I got to work on all those early warehouse district projects. Obed and Isaacs, which is not in the warehouse district, but it's in downtown Peoria.
I like that spot.
On the near north side of downtown. Those were all projects that I got to work on. It was a ton of fun. I got to work on the Pere Marquette project, which was an interesting one for sure.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, there's a whole thing with that.
Yeah, there was a couple projects I worked on that never went anywhere. And that happens. But it was great. I loved working for the city of Peoria. I loved being in the mix. things. I ran into a guy today. It was my old boss's 82nd birthday today. So happy
shout
birthday,
out to
Henry
you.
Holling.
Henry,
he was the assistant. He was the city manager for a short time, but we were celebrating his birthday at Georgia Shoeshine, just right across the street, down the street from here. And there was a guy there. His name is Ken. He's 92 years old. And I introduced myself to him. He says, "Oh, I know who you are." And I said, "Oh, really?" He says, "Yeah, you helped me a few years ago with a problem in my neighborhood." Now, I don't remember this. I just don't remember it. I don't remember it at all.
Yeah, part of the job.
But he says, "Yeah, you helped get some abandoned houses demolished by the city. These were empty, abandoned houses that were falling apart in his neighborhood." And that was a fun part of the job, was to help kind of solve problems. But then 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to take over this organization that I am now, the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council, which is a regional economic development group. So not just Peoria, not just the city, but we cover Peoria, Tazewell, Woodford County, and then also Mason and Logan counties. Mason is where Havana is. Logan County is where Lincoln is, so halfway kind of between here and Springfield. And this was an opportunity for me. I really loved working for the city. I had no desire to be a city manager. I'm not cut out for it.
It's not your thing.
God bless Patrick Urick and the city staff.
Too much politics.
It's just not the kind of thing that I was issued. Like, I love the economic development part.
You seem more like boots on the ground, hands in the mud.
And city management is a great calling. It's a great profession, and I enjoyed my time working for the city of Peoria. But I wasn't interested, quite frankly, in negotiating union contracts and dealing with the city council. We have an amazing city council. They're great individual people, but listening to citizen complaints and having to be reactive to all of that, after a while, it's not what I wanted to do. It's also a huge stress level.
It would burn you out.
But I really loved Peoria, and I didn't want to. So I loved economic development, and I loved Peoria. And so this was an opportunity to do what I love in the community I love, which was to be the head of this regional organization, which really works. I worked very closely with the city of Peoria because it is the largest city. It is the economic driver in the region. But I also get to work with the fine people in East Peoria and Washington and Pekin and Morton, and really come to understand and value that we really are a region, right? We're not just one city.
We're a huge community.
Yeah, good things happening anywhere are good for everybody. So your airwaves are not limited, right? That's not like, even though we're here in the 12th floor of a building in downtown Peoria, the radio waves don't stop at the border or they don't stop at the river, right? So we have this really amazing region that we call Greater Peoria that has so many things going for it, and my organization tries to put itself at the center of ensuring those good things keep happening.
I love the story that you have. You have this passion, as you talk about, not only just accomplishments, but the assistance you'll be able to provide a city that you fall in love with, right?
Yeah. I'm from Burbank, California.
And I think there's one thing that as soon as we touched base on the phone before recording the podcast, you told me like, "Oh yeah, I'm not a Peoria native." I just immediately assumed.
Yeah.
And you've been here since what, 2003?
Well, I've actually lived here longer than I've lived anywhere, and I grew up in L.A. I grew up in Los Angeles suburbs of Burbank, and I lived there for the first 18 years of my life, or I lived in Southern California for the first 18 years of my life. I lived here for 20. So does that make me a Californian, or does that make me a Peoria?
I think you're Peoria.
Yeah.
You're P-Town crazy now.
Yeah, right.
I think I'm born and raised Chicago. In April, it'll be 2 years officially I've been here, and every month that goes by, I start falling in love with more things about the city. For me, I feel like Peoria and the surrounding areas just have this huge heart of just giving. And what are some things that you have immediately attached you with the community when you started living here year by year? Like, what has been some takeaways that from other transplants you're like, hey, it's a great spot, come hang out with us?
So I always, when I say I love Peoria, I also recognize that people recognize that I'm paid to love Peoria. So and I always want to claim that, because but when I say that I love this place, it is not because my job is to be that way, right? I am being genuine when I say that. I met my wife in Chicago. We were both working. We joke we met at the homeless shelter. We were both working in the homeless services.
Oh, that's awesome.
At the time, and so we started dating. And she's like, "Hey, I'm where are you from?" I'm from Peoria, but don't worry, I don't ever want to move back there. And I said, "Okay, I don't even know where Peoria is, right? Because I'm from LA. I live in Chicago. I knew I had heard of Peoria, right? But I had no idea. And every time we came down here early on, like when we were dating, we just hung out with her parents. We didn't do anything.
Yeah.
We came down here for the weekend for like Easter dinner, right? And so you didn't really do anything. So I had no real connection to this place other than my wife was from here. We moved it, got married, moved to Denver, had our first daughter, wanted then to be close to family. And LA just didn't make sense financially for two social workers or two people involved in nonprofit work. Well, not actual social workers.
It seems like a high life over there.
Yeah. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. Even my parents understood. They would have loved for me to have come home, but the housing market's crazy. Well, here in Peoria, we knew that we could build a life that we could afford, and I think that's one of the things that is to me is so impressive about Peoria. And when I say affordable, I realize there are people that struggle to afford it. So I'm kind of coming at it from my own understanding, my own privilege when I say affordable. We don't have the cheapest housing market in America. There are cheaper places to live, but affordability, to me, is the ratio between the amount of money you make and the amount of money you spend. And for people who are able to have good jobs, in a community, this is an incredibly low cost community that I think has some really great qualities to it. Certainly recognizing there are a lot of faults too. And I have lived all over the country, and I will tell you that every place has bad things in it, and every place is struggling in one way or another. And so there's nothing perfect about Peoria, but I think we're striving, and I think we're working on it. And just like we are all imperfect human beings that need to be worked on, either internally or externally, same too with Peoria.
It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. We're all works in progress, right? And so when I think of the things that I've been able to do here and the quality of life that I have, we have great restaurants. We don't have a lot of and when I say we don't have a lot of great restaurants, there's not a restaurant at every corner like in Chicago, right?
Yeah, it's
crazy. But we have some really great restaurants. We have a great downtown in its own ways, right? We have a great riverfront. We have really amazing natural amenities. We have, like I said, an affordable housing where I live in the Uplands neighborhood up by Bradley University. I have fallen in love with my neighborhood and with my neighbors and the kind of the community that we have built in that, in that neighborhood. And another thing I love about Peoria is that if you want to get away, you just get away. You just drive to Chicago.
2.5, yeah.
Yeah, 2.5 from Chicago. You're 2.5 and change from St. Louis.
Yeah.
Go somewhere different. Bloomington's got a different scene. So if you want to go see music, you can go to the. You can go see a big show at the Peoria Civic Center. You can go a small show at the Castle Theater in Bloomington, right? There's all kinds of stuff around us, and the variety that Peoria provides to people, I think, is a real value. So I often say it this way, that you can have any life you want in the city of Peoria or in the Peoria area, and you'll still be 15 minutes away from everything you didn't choose. So you want to live in an urban loft. You want to live in a reclaimed barn house. You want to live in a suburb. You want to live, in a van down by the river. You can do all that thing, but everything's really close. You're from Chicago. Yeah. If you were home wherever you grew up, and you said you grew up on the south side of Chicago, how long would it take you before you got to the country? It would take you at least an hour. Yeah. On a good day, an hour.
Because I was right by White Sox, and I went to school out in Romeoville, Joliet. That was 45 minutes, and that's when it starts to become more like suburban.
A little bit more suburban, but not really rural for a little bit longer.
Now until past like Larkin and everything.
I grew up in California. It would take me an hour to get to the first anything grown at a commercial scale, right? Here you could get to see your corn grow and be harvested and grown again. You can take advantage of the Illinois River and these beautiful bluffs. You can go to a Broadway show at the Peoria Civic Center. You could see a nationally touring, concert at the Civic Center. You can eat a fine meal at a place like Ardor, get a good cup of coffee at a place like Zion. There's all of those things that you might expect out of a bigger city.
And on top of that, we have a growing market of like minority-led food businesses.
Absolutely.
And I've been seeing, I've heard with the last 3 years, it's starting expanding now. We have more transplants coming to town, or even more citizens who are native to Peoria starting businesses. And I think there was over, what they say here, $6 million in grant money was given to more than 150 businesses this past year.
Right, those were all COVID-related grants.
Yeah,
but and we have a great small business community here as well, and I just appreciate Peoria. I was up in Chicago. This was about maybe a year and a half ago, and I was speaking to a group of Brazilian startups that were in Chicago, trying to break into the U.S. market. And they gave me 15 minutes to pitch Peoria to these guys. And I went right after the Chicago guy. We were the only two that got a chance to do this. It was kind of was able to weasel our way into this opportunity because of a coworker of mine had a relationship with this organization that was putting this on. The Chicago guy talked about, Chicago is 30% cheaper than either of the coasts, and we have. It is a world-class city, and there's the Bulls, and there's the Blackhawks, and there's, all of this great stuff. And then he sat down, and I got up, and I said, everything that guy said is absolutely true. Chicago's a wonderful city, world-class dining and entertainment. It is 30% cheaper than the coast, but guess what? Peoria is 30% cheaper than Chicago. We have almost all of those same things at a different scale. We're only 2.5 hours away from it if you want to get to it. But guess what? Most of you are going to go home and watch Netflix at home. You're not going to go to a Bulls game every night. You're not going to have season tickets to whatever they're to the Chicago theater. You, like the rest of us, just go home and watch TV and hang out with your kids. Yeah. So do you want to do that in a high cost environment? And I think the other thing I really love about Peoria.
That's a good sell point right there.
Well, that's my job. Yeah, it's my job to come up with stuff like that. Is a lack of traffic.
Yeah, 15 minutes. I'm across town, easy.
And that kind of gets back to whatever lifestyle you choose. You're only 15 minutes away from the lifestyle you didn't choose. Traffic here is non-existent.
I heard someone complain about traffic a week ago. I'm like, brother, I don't want to hear unless you've been stuck in 55 or 290, 94 in the middle of rush hour.
Right. Or not even in the middle of the rush hour. So I'm from Los Angeles, right?
So yours is worse.
Right. So I went from LA to Chicago to Denver and then to Peoria. That's kind of my trajectory. I said every place I moved to had a better traffic situation than the place I came from, but everybody complained about traffic just as much. Even here in Peoria, people complain about traffic. And if you've been stuck in the 405 freeway through the Sepulveda Pass at Los Angeles at 1 a.m,
I'm good.
You could be like, why do I live like this? Why am I, I did a calculation a couple of years ago using U.S. Census data on the average commute time in Peoria County versus Cook County, so Chicago versus Peoria. Mm-hmm. And the difference in the average commute time was like the average commute time in Cook County. Now that's not DuPage or
that's
Will.
That's where I was raised, Cook County. Yeah,
it's like 26 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe it was somewhere around 26 minutes, and the average in Peoria was like 15, something like that. Well, and that's only a 10-minute difference. 10 minutes times 2 is 20. 20 times 5 is 100. You multiply that by 50 weeks, and then you divide by however many minutes are all of a sudden you realize you are spending 2.6 days of your life in traffic more just by living in Chicago than in Peoria.
And the cost, fuel, the maintenance on the car.
What could you do with an extra 2.5 days of your life every year?
Watch more episodes on Netflix, brother.
Right, that too. But you understand that it might be good for radio, by the way, to have more people stuck in the car more often.
I'm not complaining. Can you put another traffic light up downside?
Yeah, right. But it's incredible how we're taping this at 3:00. I was actually working from home today. I looked down, it was 2:45. I said, I guess I got to go.
You got here early, too.
Yeah, and I got here early because it only takes me 4.5 minutes to get from the hilltop down here. So, and that is a real quality of life that I don't think that people I don't think if you've ever lived anywhere else, you recognize how good we have it here when it comes to that.
Well, yeah, because it's that stress aspect of things. Like, say, if I have to get downtown Peoria, but I'm near Hacienda Mirador up on Junction City, right? I could be down here in 15 minutes, easy, maybe 10, depending on
Especially
the light
if those
situation.
lights get
If you hit all green down there, come out. Like, that is a blessing. Thank you. Now, I have to ask this from just a person's standpoint, right? You fall in love with the town. You have all this XYZ. How does it feel to actually move around a city that you can physically see your additions to that town?
Oh, I love it. And I get to do less of it now that I'm more of a regional role because I don't get to so there isn't a building in the warehouse district I haven't walked in through. Now, whether or not they've been renovated or not, I've walked through them at some point, and I love it. It's such it's cool, and I don't think my daughters care, but I thought, oh yeah, I worked on that project, one of my very first projects was called the Illinois Medical Center, which is on the campus of the University of Illinois College of Medicine, right? Kind of as Main Street curves and comes down the hill. There's that big red brick building on the downriver side of Maine, and that was one of my first projects that I got to work on. And every time I drive by it, I still smile a little bit. And so it was a fun part of my career to get involved in some of those things.
Now, we're talking projects, we're talking improvement. We've touched on the riverfront a little bit, but I heard there's this big new possible expansion to the riverfront that's going to include kayaking, a dog park, entertainment. Can you take me a little bit through this possible new additions?
Now that's more of a city thing, but I'm aware of it because it's super important. And downtown Peoria is not just important to Peoria. It is important to the region, and everybody has to recognize that, right? If you're in Morton, if you're in Washington, if you're in East Peoria, if you're in the 5th District of Peoria, outside the Dunlap area, downtown in Peoria is got to be important to you and to all of us, the business community and individuals, because it is what people will remember us by.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it has a potential to be even better, right? So we've got this amazing riverfront that cities would kill to have, the riverfront and the skyline that we have.
It's a perfect view, man.
It is.
Perfect.
You come around that corner on I-74, and you're like, that's a real city.
I will tell you right now, before we continue, the first time I knew I was like Peorian-ish, and it's hard for me to say because I'm a proud Chicagoan, but it was after my first full year here. I was coming back from Christmas, and I crossed by that bridge, and I just got this overwhelming sense of, oh no, this is my town now.
I'm home now.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was very weird, but I saw the skyline. I'm like, I'm used to a skyline, but for some reason it kind of had that extra warmth aspect to it.
So the city of Peoria is really starting to focus on the riverfront again. I mean, and there have been, this was all before you got here. There have been previous efforts to,
there was a parking structure there.
There was a parking structure. It was kind of like a platform, and there was parking underneath, and then there were buildings on top of it. There was restaurants on top of it, but it just kind of never worked out. But our riverfront is really important, and so the city of Peoria worked with State Representative Jahan Gordon Booth, and they were able to get they were able to get a $15 million grant to do some work on the riverfront. Now, this stuff is expensive, and $15 million doesn't get you nearly as far as you might think it would. But their idea is, how do you make the riverfront what I would call active and an active area? So passive parks just tend to be places you just walk. Active parks have things for you to do or ways for you to interact. And so that may be having like a kayak launch or a canoe launch. That might be having a dog park, having some art, having some activities, whether it's a small stage where, where they can have, bands play or do movies in the park or things like that to draw people to the riverfront. And then hopefully those folks will go on to eat at the Blue Duck or Ardor or Rhythm Kitchen, go to the museum, or
generate
the
revenue in the city. Yeah.
Right. When you go to a really cool town, when you go to a city, you remember their downtown. You don't remember if you went and visited a friend in Boston. or in Chicago even, and a place you'd never been to before, and they happen to live in the suburbs. You're not going to remember what their suburb looks like. You're going to remember what their downtown looks like, and that's what's got to be attractive. That's what gets people interested in a community. Nobody remembers your suburbs. Your suburbs are super important. That's not, when I say that, doesn't mean that our suburbs aren't important. But from a marketing standpoint, we're not marketing your subdivision. We're marketing our downtown, and so it has to be as good as it can be. And downtown is changing, right? It used to be a center of employment, and it isn't anymore because of COVID and just some of the changes, right? So we have a lot of empty office space.
Yeah, I've been noticing.
And this building that we are in right now, the 12th floor, this building was an office building.
The entire building?
The entire building was an office building. This floor that your radio stations are on is the other 10 floors are all apartments now.
Yeah. Because
the need for downtown office space isn't what it used to be. And so we need to think of downtown still being a place to work. It's just, we still have some important drivers of employment down here. OSF Healthcare, Caterpillar, law firms, banks. These are all still important parts of having a downtown. But it also has to be a place where people visit. And our Civic Center is an incredible draw.
It's a great venue to see.
But there's got to be, it's a great venue, and they're well programmed. They have a diversity of things that from Broadway plays to the symphony to Disturbed, right?
Yeah, they were just here.
I mean, just like country.
Afro Man was here like a year ago or something like that. It was just every type of diverse act you could think about, whether it's country, hip hop, rock and roll. Peoria is really good about bringing the artists into town.
Right. So how do you get people who come to the Civic Center to stay in downtown? And instead of leaving the Civic Center and going right for their cars, say, hey, let's go do something else. So that's all part of the system that the city's trying to build with improving its streets, right? The Adams and Jefferson, Main Street, they have money to do some work along Main Street, and then improve the riverfront as well. And then hopefully get a passenger rail to Chicago. That's the other thing that's out there.
That is the
that we may be talking about this a decade from now, then the train finally pulls in, because these things don't happen quickly. But it's all part of a strategy to improve downtown Peoria.
So when it comes to strategies, what are some things that are within the next few years that we could see as major improvements happening in the city?
Yeah, so from a Peoria standpoint, I think the riverfront for sure. Is what you'll see. I know they're working now to kind of unlock that money, that the grant's been allocated but not or obligated but not allocated, or however they say that. So they don't have the money in hand, just but they're working on that, and I think we will see some major improvements. They are starting the street work on Adams and Jefferson.
They're going to make it two-way.
They're going to make it two-way, which is not to be underestimated. The power of that. The warehouse district. Adams and Jefferson through the warehouse district were a one-way couplet, and then we changed it from one-way to two-way and improved the sidewalks, put in planters, put in lighting, and it wasn't until we took that step that all of those other developments happened. And
it's interesting how that kind of it's a little domino effect. Once one thing kind of starts picking up, and you start getting steam on things.
I think it's a couple of things. One, I say this a lot. People invest in places that are being invested in. True. So one thing leads to another, right? And sometimes it's the public sector that needs to make that first step. But when I was working on
what do you mean by that? That's
interesting. Because sometimes it's the public sector that needs to say, this is our
this is where we need funding.
This is our vision. And we're going to put some investment in that so that you can see that we mean business when we say this is our vision. So the warehouse district, as an idea, started in 2007. And we had a lot of pretty pictures. We created some economic incentives, and nothing happened. Now, it was a poor timing. 2008, 2009, we were in a recession across the country, so nobody was doing really anything. But then the city got $10 million in federal grant money. They got $10 million in state grant money, and they put in about $5 million of their own. And they redid all of the streets in the warehouse district. That you see now. What you know, as somebody who just came here 2 years ago, you might not have realized what was just there 10 years before. It's called the warehouse district because there were a bunch of empty warehouses. And
it named itself.
Yeah. And the minute, so 2012, I think, was when we got those grants, and by 2014, all that work was done. I might be getting my years wrong now. And that's when we started to see the private sector say, that's what I used to put it this way. It was the city's job to build the frame so that the private sector could paint the picture. So the public infrastructure needed to match the vision that we had for that area. So now we fast forward to the city of Peoria and its image and its work on downtown Peoria. And it's got to be the same thing, right? We need this. If we want a walkable environment that has street level retail and has, people that are, enjoying downtown, you can't have 5 lanes going one way.
Yeah.
Where people can easily drive 50 miles an hour down Adams Street, right? That's not what you need. And I will say that as important as Peoria's downtown is, all of our communities have to work on their downtowns. I was sitting with Mayor Phelan from Peoria Heights yesterday. They've done such an amazing job with Prospect, and they're going to be doing more investment in Prospect. They got a
East
federal
Peoria
grant.
is also doing things
East
too.
Peoria, what they've done with the Levy District.
Yeah.
Morton's downtown, Washington Square, Pekin's Court Street. These are all important. They're important for their own communities so that they have a place that feels different and unique and a place for small businesses to grow, but also for the entire region to have that vibrancy. Because I love Peoria, but sometimes I want to go somewhere else. And I go to WTF Taco in Pekin, or I'll go to Kemp 208 in Morton, because they're different, and those are nice communities as well. I'm going to dinner in Eureka tonight, right?
Oh, nice.
Great
Where
little
at?
community. It's called Pickled Radish Provisions. It's a brand new restaurant in Eureka. Right? We have these great communities that are just right around us. So we should take advantage of those. So everybody investing in their own downtowns is important, individually, but also collectively.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't at least open this dialogue, because I've done a lot of work in District 150, and also now I'm starting to break in South End. And as I drive around both communities, I see a lot of businesses that are closed, boarded up, and just, I hate to say it this way, but sometimes it doesn't look like it's safe to walk in some areas. And that's just for me being an outsider, just quick perspective from someone on the economical level. And we also have the public sector that we're talking about. What needs to happen for those areas to improve in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, and that's your observations are spot on. And we have some very difficult parts of our community for the people that live there, right? Who are and in many ways trapped there. I think that from a public sector, again, this is a problem that is not Peoria's problem alone. I think it's a regional issue.
Yeah.
The disparity that we have in Peoria is racial disparity, almost, not exclusively, but pretty much, and the entire region can't move forward if one little part of it is not moving forward. We kind of all go together. So
I agree.
I think everybody needs to be concerned about poverty in Peoria. And we have some other, by the way, poor parts of our community in Pekin and parts of East Peoria and in some rural poverty. So, but downtown, or the south side of Peoria, is one of the poorest zip codes in America. And it's going to take some collective effort to reinvest. The most important thing we can do, I think, is workforce training. Is give people the skills, because this is a very American thing to say, but there's really no problem that money can't fix, right?
That is a very American.
It's a very American thing to say, but really, the problem that a lot of these families have is that they don't have enough money. And the best way to get money is through a job. And the best way to get a job that gives you enough money is to have the right credential and the right skills to take advantage of the jobs that are there. Now, there's all sorts of other barriers, transportation, childcare, other things that all need to be worked on simultaneously. But we have a high school dropout problem, and we have reading proficiency problems. And all of these things.
We have a violence problem also.
We have a violence problem.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another, right? Violence, is a byproduct of poverty, right?
Oh yeah.
Not exclusively. Obviously, there are plenty of violent rich people too. But you end up in a culture, right?
But there's a causality of everything.
There's a causality of it, and I think it's there's the drug trade becomes
I've noticed.
It becomes a way of making money, right? and there's a lot of violence associated with the drug trade. So, we have kind of a lack of family stability. All of these things kind of stem from poverty. Single parent households or households, where they might have to work multiple jobs, or they're not working any jobs, or there's.
But if you have parents that are working multiple jobs, kids unsupervised, and a community,
you have a lot of mental health issues that stem from
there's so
poverty.
many varying issues. Yeah.
And then you have trauma on top of that. So you have young people who are dealing with trauma. They're seeing their parents in fights. They're seeing, they have instability in their own lives. So they find themselves moving from house to house, like couch surfing. That causes trauma on a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. They're aware that things aren't right, that, that they could be hungry one day and not the next. Those all then impact their their educational attainment. There's some real issues that are, and there's a faction in our society that just wants to blame poor people for being poor without recognizing all of how hard it is to not be poor, and that all of those bills that come due, and how expensive it is just to live life at a meaningful level. And how that kind of trickles down. So this is a big issue. On how are we addressing that? So Illinois Central College, which I don't think we in Peoria realize how lucky we are to have a community college that is as progressive, not in the political progressive word, but like they are forward thinking and entrepreneurial and doing things different. To address some of these. And they have a great program called the Workforce Equity Program. That is, you have to be from a low-income family. They will put you into training in a program that will graduate you into a job that pays 30% more than the living wage for the county. You get paid while you are going to school, a stipend. Because even if school is free, quote unquote free, it isn't free if you have to quit your job to go to class.
Or so pay for gas that you don't have to give.
So they pay you to go to school. It's called an earn and learn model. And they've had 700 individuals come through ICC over the last few years. That's 700 individuals who are hopefully out of poverty and into a family sustaining wage job. We need more of that. We need our employers to engage with ICC on hiring people who come out of this program. We need our social service agencies to understand what's available and guide people into the right programs. And we need families and peer networks to value going to work and say, this is what you need to do to get ahead. You see sometimes in very low income areas, when somebody is getting ahead, everybody else gets down on them.
Oh, like the crab,
well,
the bucket
there's the crab
syndrome?
pot theory.
Because I've experienced that a few times in my life.
Like, so it's kind of like when you're the nerd in grade school.
Oh, yeah,
you're the smart kid, right? And everybody else picks on the nerd. Like, shouldn't we value that somebody's got
look at that
some brains?
Fool in band camp.
Right,
like, dude, I'm playing an instrument.
Right. You know who else was a nerd?
Prince.
Prince was probably a nerd. Bill Gates was probably a nerd.
Yes.
And now we all work for him, right?
Yeah.
But we have to be able to value success as well. And those are it's easy enough for me to say I grew up in a 2-parent household and both my parents had jobs. They were blue collar household, but still so I recognize how difficult it is for a lot of these, a lot of families in these communities just to get by. And, just as they're maybe see the light at the end of the tunnel, boom, it's slammed back on them because they have just one bad thing go wrong. A tire blowout, head gasket blowout, their kid gets sick, they've got a medical bill, something bad happens, and they're just off track because they don't have that kind of resiliency. So that's what organizations like the Community Foundation, like the United Way, like our social service agencies and our churches and our schools all have to be involved in
all
making sure those families, all those we have an amazing, here's another thing you kind of, I don't know how long we've gone here now, probably a while. You just keep going.
I like this conversation,
We'll just keep talking until you've run out of battery. But We have an amazingly generous community.
Very much so.
And I wish I could measure it. And one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to measure it on a per capita basis. But I'm on the board of directors of the Community Foundation of Central Illinois. We have the largest community foundation outside of the Chicago area in the state of Illinois.
That's amazing.
Our United Way is one on a per capita basis. Jennifer Zamuno doesn't ever want me to say this, but on a per capita basis, one of the best funded United Ways in the whole country.
Really?
We are, people. You said, I think it was WEK. I heard the story of a guy who gave every employee at Gebby's $1,000 because his wife died and he was a longtime patron, and so he donated a $30,000. That's those tearjerker stories happen across the country. They're not exclusive to Peoria. But it doesn't surprise me that it happened in Peoria.
It just makes more sense here.
Yeah, here you have that sense. We call it Midwest nice. People are just nice here.
Mm-hmm.
Nicer certainly than in Los Angeles, where nobody seems to care about anybody else.
How many followers you have? That's when you leave the conversation.
And the stories you hear about New York City and the East Coast and things like that.
I've been over there.
Peoria is a nice place, and people are nice, and I think even our business community. And I've said this before. Obviously there are elements of our business community that are in competition with each other, like banks, right? But I have even found that banks tend to work together, right? And I just saw, so there was a restaurant in town that said they were struggling. It was a donut shop. So they're struggling, they might have to close their doors. And the first time I saw it was because another restaurant said, hey, I'm going over there tomorrow to figure out how I can use their products in my meals.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool to think that, businesses that might be rivals with each other find ways of lifting each other up. And I'm just going to pretend it only happens in Peoria because I'd like to think that it only happens in Peoria.
You know what? I can add to that because, and my consultants probably get mad that I'm even mentioning this, but one of our main competitors, Strictly Hip Hop, Mark Supreme, shout out to him, amazing guy. In other markets, different competing radio stations aren't that cool. But Mark has tossed me multiple interviews for the podcast, has sent me business my way. And anytime I hear anything, I send stuff to him. And we created this very much Peoria-esque type of working relationship where it's like, hey, I can't put this on my radio station. Can you put it on yours? And because it's better for the community. And I love that. I've never experienced that in my profession in 16 years.
Yeah.
And to have that movement here, that it adds to the factor of Peoria just has this huge heart that I'm starting to discover that they just want, people in Peoria just want to give back.
I find that in the business community too, and I think one of the values that we try to talk about when, so I mentioned that I went up and talked to this group of Brazilian startups. One of them ended up moving here.
Oh, nice!
And opened his first North American office of DigiFarms, which is an ag tech software company, is located in the Peoria Next Innovation Center in Bradley. And that's all because my colleague knew the people that were running this event in Chicago and got me a 15-minute spot to talk about Peoria. And then he said, I'd like to come down and visit. And my other colleague showed him around. And then a year later, he moved here.
Yeah.
But one of the values that we were able to kind of not just talk about, but display is that Peoria is small enough, and again, every time I say Peoria, I really mean greater Peoria, right? Not just the city. The Peoria area is small enough that whoever you want to talk to will get you a way to talk to them. It's not a big city where you got to go through 18 different gatekeepers to get to the mayor of Peoria. You want the mayor of Peoria? She'll come talk to you.
Phone number's on the website. Like, you could just get it right now.
You want to talk to John Call in East Peoria? Or Gary Manier in Washington, we'll get you that.
Like, I got in contact with you quickly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, from Caleb, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all fairly accessible, and we all want to see each other succeed. And so we're big enough of a community that we have features to ourselves, right? We're not a one-trick pony. There's opportunity here. But we're small enough that we're all kind of interconnected. And you may feel this as a guy who's only been for 2 years. It does kind of feel like the biggest small town in America.
Yeah.
And it also, when I was early on, I said, did everybody go to high school together here?
I also get that vibe. Yeah.
They even call themselves the Spalding Mafia. I mean, did they really all go to college, high school together? Because it did feel like that. Like everybody seemed like they grew up here. But we actually have a lot of transplants that live in the region because of Caterpillar, because of Bradley, because of the hospitals. So
or relationships.
But people do care for one another in a way that I think is very special, and is a way that is hard to quantify and define. But when I talk to businesses about moving here, or even businesses that are here, so I know a guy who can help you overcome that.
This is definitely the I know a guy or I know a person community.
Well, I always joke with my staff, my job's to know people. After 18 years, like, my job is just to know people.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing I've really come to love about our conversation right now is I respect, one, how aware you are about things in our community and how open you are to have the conversation about it. Like, that in itself, I really enjoy that part. But also that even after 20 some odd years, you still have this passion to talk. Like, as you're talking, I see the smile. I see the energy of it as you're reliving some of your accomplishments, but also the fact that there's a future. Like, it's not that you're stuck on what has happened, but what may and still can happen. That is awesome. I love seeing that, man. So, 2 questions I got for you. One, what does Peoria mean to you as a transplant? Because I'm a transplant. You're now Peoria proud after 20 odd years. What does Peoria mean to you, the person?
Yeah, so you kind of said, like, Peoria's home. Now, my mom may or may not ever listen to this. I might send it to her. And when I left home at age 18 and went to college at the University of Notre Dame, and I never came home after that, right? And I love my mom, and I love where I grew up, and I love being from California. But this is home to me. I raised 2 daughters here, one who still lives here, one who's in college. So this is home to me. When I come down 74 after being out of town for whatever reason, and I make that turn right past Fieldcrest, and kind of pops open, and there you see downtown, and I know I'm home. So Peoria it feels like home to me.
Oh yeah. So the one question I like to end the podcast on, I could talk to you for hours, man. I'm enjoying this conversation, but we got lives we got to get to, unfortunately.
We've lost all of your listeners by now. Like, my God, is that guy gone for an hour and a half?
Yeah, I got told keep him on 30, but when it's good and it's episode 50, man, we got to talk.
This could be episode 50 and 51.
Maybe. It's all about how you split it up.
Right.
But when it's all said and done, and your story, your personal chapter in life, has come to a close, what do you want people to take away from that story?
Ooh. Boy, that's a deep question to end on. I have tried to make it so that there's not a lot of distinction between my personal life and my professional life, which is maybe why I ended up in a role like I did with economic development, where you kind of have to live your job, right? There's not a real separation. But I remember a long time ago, my friend said to me that there are 2 types of people that work in this industry, and he was talking more about municipal work. He says there's public employees and there's public servants, and you want to be the public servant, and there's nothing wrong with being a public employee. You go to work, you punch a clock, you do your job, you get by. I've always believed in public service, where I went to the University of Notre Dame. And got to know a guy, Father Don McNeil, who was the head of what was called the Center for Social Concerns. It's kind of how I ended up in social work to begin with, because I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to go into politics.
Oh, you went a completely different way.
Yeah, and I ended up in a completely different way. And that's podcast number 3 with you. We can talk about how Chris got to where he is. But the idea of service to community became very important to me, and actually modeled by my own parents, who I didn't realize I was seeing it at the time. Their involvement in church, and being on church council, and the things that my mom does to this day, and so I would hope that, like, at the end of my career, right, like in my obituary, whether it's my professional obituary or my actual obituary, I will be remembered as being a servant of the community, and I try to say that with all humility, right? Like, service is, you have to be humble in your service as well. And I don't expect to have made big impressions, right? Like there's not going to be a building named after me. I don't any of that. I would hope that would people, and this is what I tell my staff about kind of the ethos of our organization. I want people to come to us because if they don't know how to solve something, they think, well, maybe the GPDC can help. And that's kind of the way I've tried to build my own professional ethos is Chris might not know the answer, but he'll help you get there. And that's really how I've tried to come at my own career is just to be the guy that people say, well, he'll at least try.
A child of the coast, a servant of the Midwest,
Ooh.
And a proud Peorian.
Man, the child of the coast, the servant of the Midwest, that could be, if I ever decided to write an autobiography, I have to give you credit now. In the
free
forward.
of charge, brother. Free of charge.
Thank you. So I'd like that.
Thanks so much, man. This has been a pleasure of a conversation. Just hearing, because I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't know much of economical development and all this. This is all new
Some
territory.
would say neither do I.
And that's the humility, brother.
Yeah, right.
This has been episode 50 of the KZ Community Beat. Tis I, your host, Ross Martinez, and my guest for episode 50, Chris Setti, the CEO of Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. Man, brother, thank you so much,
man.
man.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Go back, listen to all the other 49 episodes, or Chris and I will repave your driveway.
Right, yeah, or at least shovel the snow.
Did you hear the story of the person that got the driveway stolen?
They got their driveway stolen?
Yeah, they came back from buying. So, quick story. This was viral on the
still on
internet.
air?
Yeah. Screw it. This is how we're going out, brother. This is a very low production type of pod. You here for the story, you stay for the laughs. No, so she was out Christmas shopping, came back home, driveway was gone. Someone just stole it. Think about that. And we'll see you for episode 51.
Right.
Yeah, no, they stole her driveway.
How do you steal a driveway?